Hello and welcome to the Armenian News Network Groong Week in Review for January 21, 2024. Today we're talking with Yeghia Tashjian. Welcome to the show, Yeghia.
Hello, everyone.
Well, Israel's war on Palestine in Gaza is raging. We've gone over 25,000 dead and over 60,000 injured, which is a human tragedy by any standard of measurement. All indications are that Israel is preparing to take the war north to Lebanon and involve Iranian allied Hezbollah forces. Yemen has managed to severely disrupt shipping lanes in the Red Sea, and Iran has struck targets in Iraq, Syria, and even bombed alleged terrorist camps in Pakistan. The following day, of course, Pakistan retaliated using the same allegations. So the prospects for peace look dim. Yeghia, what do you assess the risk to be in the Israeli war in Gaza to expand into a larger regional conflagration?
Thank you, Asbed. Basically, if you had asked me the same question at least 2 months ago, I would have said that no, I'm not expecting a regional war or something. However, what is also interesting, given if we read the internal Israeli domestic debate, even within the government circles between Netanyahu and his rivals, even within the same cabinet, we see that there is a lot of disagreement. Netanyahu is basically pushing for a major war because the prolongation of the war will also means that he will remain for power for some time. Given that there are corruption cases, judicial cases against him, so he needs something to remain in power and to help him when it comes to immunity. It was almost 2 weeks ago when there was drone attack in Dahya. Dahya is in southern area of Beirut, which is also known as Hezbollah's stronghold. And the Palestinian Hamas leader was assassinated there. And then in the south, we also started seeing that Israelis were assassinating local Hezbollah officials. And yesterday, also Iranian Revolutionary Guards officials, generals in Damascus. So Netanyahu is trying to provoke a major war because a major war means that the Americans will be forced to intervene back and also come back to the region militarily. This is what I think he is betting. From the other perspective, of course, we can go in detail when it comes to Houthis. Also, Houthi has changed the whole calculation in the Red Sea and the area. But also, until now, when it comes to Hezbollah is trying to engage in crisis management. That is just trying to limit its reaction because also Hezbollah, to some extent, has domestic calculations in Lebanon and is trying to avoid a major war until now.
Right. So, what were the reasons for Iran's strikes on Iraq, Syria, and Pakistan? And what's the significance of the timing now?
This is the $1 billion question, actually. Why Iran? I'm not surprised by its attack on northern Iraq or the Kurdistan region, even in Syria, because this has happened many times before. However, Iran's attack on Pakistan, a nuclear country and also neighboring country and friendly, was very interesting for me.
Yeah.
Even though the reaction was very limited from Pakistan, and also what is interesting that the Iranians, they tried to manage the crisis very quickly. There was a meeting, I think, in Davos between the Iranian foreign minister and I think whether the foreign or defense minister of Pakistan. So there was a meeting, something like this. And then Pakistan cut its diplomatic relation and then renewed its diplomatic relation almost after 48 hours. What is also interesting that if we measure, for example, the track of the missiles targeting also Idlib, it's almost the same as the distance from Iran to Tel Aviv. So basically, that's also a message from the Iranian side to the Israelis that if you engage in terror attacks or if assassinating our officials means that we have the possibility or the potential even to target Tel Aviv. Even though I don't think that will happen because this will cause a major war. But also Pakistan's attack was interesting. Maybe, I'm not being Armenocentric, but also it is a message to other neighboring countries who are harboring or hosting Mossad or Israeli, whether military or intelligence bases around Iran. And of course, this is what I mean also in South Caucasus.
And Azerbaijan specifically, right?
Yes, Azerbaijan or other countries also in Central Asia.
So you're answering the question that I had next, which was what message was Iran sending and to whom? So this answers it. Do you think these strikes are strategic in nature or mostly political, geopolitical?
Can be both. Actually, I was reading a book now. The book is not with me. It's my office, so I forgot the author. But it's a new book about the military strategy of the Iran Revolutionary Guards Corps. It's very interesting and to some extent objective because rarely Western scholars write very objective analysis about Iran's internal domestic. The argument was that actually the Iran Revolutionary Guards is becoming very autonomous non-state actor and it's not directly linked to the civil structure in Iran. That is, the Iranian presidency, the foreign ministry, or the defense ministry do not have a role when it comes to decision making. And the Iranian Revolutionary Guards are the ones who are targeting or engaging in guerrilla warfare or supporting other armed groups or missile strikes to Israeli or American targets. So it is not clear whether these strikes are confirmed or approved by the Iranian civil institutions, that is the foreign ministry or defense ministry, or the Iranian Revolutionary Guards are acting independently and coordinating, of course, with the supreme leader because they are linked through hierarchy to the supreme leader directly.
How does this make a difference, Yeghia? Whether it's one or the other from an international perspective, do they not say this is Iran?
That's another huge important question. Usually, because when the attack or the missile strike on Pakistan or the alleged terror groups happened there, the foreign ministry quickly responded that Pakistan is a neighboring country, but we were trying to. This is only for self-defense and so on. While the Iranian Revolutionary Guards were, for example, posting videos and they were very proud and they were showing also muscle and power. Unlike the foreign ministry was trying to calm things because let's not forget that both countries are members in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and it is not in the interest of China and Russia to literally explode this whole organization, which is something that the Americans want. So we have to always differentiate between the civil institutions in Iran and also the military institutions which are directly linked to the supreme leader. Of course, has also geopolitical messages. It's a show of muscles that Iran actually can bomb any place, even in neighboring and friendly countries, because when it comes to terror organizations or individuals linked to Mossad, then they are direct target. And I mean, let's not forget that there are Israeli embassies and Mossad, maybe underground organizations or linked not just in the Arab world, but the whole neighboring countries of Iran. So basically, the whole neighboring countries near Iran are potential targets. As long as Israel continues provoking, then Iran will also take retaliatory steps.
You mentioned America. What's interesting is that for a military action from a nation like Iran, the media reverberations here in the US were trivial. There was hardly any echo in the mainstream media here, instead of the expected drumbeats of war, let's bomb Iran, etc. Why do you think that was?
It depends. Maybe if in November, I mean, Trump gets reelected and in January he will be inaugurated, we'll see the opposite, especially the neoconservative, like the media, they will say that, yeah, let's bomb Iran and so on. While Biden administration are doing their best to prevent a major war. And this is why they are pressuring actually Israel not to go for a war against Hezbollah in Lebanon. Otherwise, I think that Israel would have initiated a war against Hezbollah.
Yeghia, moving on, in the past few months, Western resolve and funding appears to be weakening. Some attribute this to the election year in the US and the prospects for a new Trump presidency, as well as the Israel-Gaza war, which has started in October and has diffused or essentially stolen resources from Ukraine and attention. What is your assessment of the war in Ukraine and where it will head in 2024?
I mean, if Armenia was one of the victims of the Ukraine war, I can say that Ukraine is now one of the victims of the Israeli-Gaza war. Because the main shift of the Western media and also the international media is now on Gaza, the humanitarian crisis, or let's say it clearly, it is a genocide that is going on in Gaza. The whole media attention is there. We're seeing civilians dying. Almost 90% of the people killed in Gaza are civilians. They are even elderly women or children. Rarely we seeing Hamas, for example, fighters are being killed and so on. Maybe there are a few thousand, only 2 or 3, but the majority are civilians. And also, let's not forget the Israeli or the Jewish lobby is very, very active in US and either other parts. So they are mobilizing the media in their interest, which is something like very normal and clear. And also the US elections in November, we think Trump is making a comeback, which was maybe surprising for me. I'm not expert in the US elections. I'm just reading in the news. So the Biden administration and the Democrats are very concerned that the war in Gaza and Iran showing muscles maybe will try to trigger the Republicans to make a comeback, and they accused Biden for being very weak to contain the Iranian interests in the region. So definitely developments in the Middle East will have a direct impact on the elections of the US, and not just the US. I mean, there are a lot of important elections also to be held in Europe. The rise of the right-wing movement, the leftists, and so on. So every side will try to push and mobilize the street based on its interests.
So this war in Ukraine and in general, but I don't think it's right to say that there are winners, especially with so many civilian deaths both in Ukraine and Gaza. But in Ukraine specifically, do you foresee for there to be any winners and losers yet in geopolitically?
For now, okay, if we will try to assess the war in Ukraine starting February 2022, Russia invaded almost eastern Ukraine. The Russian troops were very close to capture Kiev, and then Ukrainians showed resistance, very strong resistance, backed by NATO countries, and everyone was anticipating that there was going to be a major Ukrainian, let's say, counteroffensive and so on. The counteroffensive failed. So now what is going on? It is a war of attrition. The Russians are not able to move forward because this needs a lot of manpower and also resources. That's something that Russia now doesn't have. And the Ukrainians, they cannot move forward because this is the maximum. I mean, the Europeans are not able to provide the funding for a long time. So the stagnation of the current crisis, there is stalemate. So basically, now the Europeans, I mean, I know at least my visit to Europe that some European countries, non-NATO countries, they are trying to have a back channel with the Russians to freeze the conflict and try to engage at least a ceasefire. The conflict resolution of Ukraine will not happen. It's very far from reality. So at least a ceasefire and freezing the conflict. And this is actually serves the Russian interest because Russia would have secured at least the eastern part of Ukraine until to find a solution. And this solution will not come until Zelensky is replaced and someone comes instead of Putin. So basically, from here to 10 years, I don't see any solution for Ukraine because both there is no compromise from the Ukrainian and the Russian side. And also, it's impossible for now for the Europeans or the West to normalize relations with Russia under Putin. I don't see any major winners. I only see a ceasefire that will try to calm things down until a major war will break in the future or a major conflict resolution will happen, and it will either make Ukraine neutral and a federal republic, or we will see this for coming decades. The situation will just freeze.
And many observers are waiting to see, like what you said, how the Ukraine war will shake out. But according to you, I guess they will be waiting for some time. Do you see this ceasefire even, for instance, affecting Russia's engagement in the South Caucasus, Armenia, Artsakh, and all around?
Yes, ceasefire is very important for us, and putting an end to the war in Ukraine is very crucial. I mean, as I said, I always say Armenia was the sacrifice of this war. We were the victim of this war, unfortunately. The comeback of Russia will not be immediate, it will take time. Russia can play or replay a major role in the South Caucasus only by cooperating with Iran, because only a Russian-Iranian axis can contain the Turkish interests. Turkey now has a major ally in the region, which is Azerbaijan, and Azerbaijan is very proactive. Also Georgia to some extent, which is the bridge between NATO and the region. So basically, you have the Turkish-Azerbaijan axis plus Russia, which is Russia is now forced to cooperate with Turkey for geopolitical reasons and also for with Azerbaijan for geoeconomic reasons, mainly related to the international North-South trade corridor. And Armenia is actually like not a player in the region, just sometimes trying to bring the Western interests and provoke Russia, and sometimes maybe just this is the will of Pashinyan, or because Armenia is literally abandoned by everyone and it's trying to just play in the ground. However, if we realize that in the future there is strong axis or cooperation between Iran and Russia to contain the Turkish interest, then definitely it is from the national security of Armenia and Armenia's national interest to be part of this axis in order to push Turkey out of the region. Whether this will happen through geoeconomic means or through geopolitical means or through war or peaceful means, I don't know. Because Armenia's resources are also limited. I mean, the Armenian army needs to be rearmed. And also the whole concept of the army should be changed because now, I mean, with all due respect, I mean, we cannot fight in many fronts alone. We need a backup. We need strong backup, and also Armenia needs like Iranian or Russian, also why not Western support in order to try to contain the Turkish-Azerbaijani interest or the axis in the region.
Yeah, one of Russia's main partners in the war in Ukraine has been Iran. It has provided unwavering military and diplomatic support to Russia. Naturally, Iran's raised political and military profile, both in Ukraine and the Middle East, carries over that influence to our region around Armenia. How do Iran's actions in the Middle East affect the Armenian-Azerbaijani negotiations?
One of my major concerns when I heard that the Iranians bombed terror bases in Pakistan was that a war or a crisis that would deviate Iran's attention from the South Caucasus. And if we realize also, Aliyev started bringing back the so-called Zangezur narrative in the last few weeks. I was very concerned that actually this would trigger a major war, all military operation that would force Armenia to give a corridor or extraterritorial corridor in Syunik or Zangezur. And also Lavrov's statements were very concerning. The idea was that, yes, there is no Zangezur corridor. However, Armenia must give the Russians the way so that they can secure, or the Russian border guards should secure, which was, of course, mentioned in the trilateral statement. However, we cannot be selective in the trilateral statement. Either the Russians, they have to respect the whole clauses, or the statement has been bad.
Absolutely.
This is something also the Russians should understand. I mean, yes, we understand their position, but they also should understand. I mean, like, this is typical, like something international relation 101. And I won't comment on Zakharova's statement. That was like hilarious when she said that ethnic cleansing hasn't happened and so, but that's something else. So basically, yes, Iran's involvement in the region will have a direct impact because Israel would, I mean, there is of course possibility that Israel can open a new front in north of Iran or other parts near Iran in order to destabilize whether Iran's domestic politics or internal politics dynamics, or of course, would try to deviate Iran's attention from the Middle East. This is something Israel can do, but I'm not sure whether Aliyev is ready to risk escalation with Iran just to please the Israelis. This is something that, at least for now, Azerbaijan has showed resilience not to be part of a proxy war against Iran, but the future developments, we will see which direction the Israeli and the Iranian conflict, or the frozen conflict, let's say, or the calm conflict will go.
Yeah. Do you think there's a high level of convergence between the national security interests of Armenia and Iran in our region currently? And if so, how can Armenia leverage that synergy to its benefit?
I mean, when it comes to the maybe Middle East foreign policy, I mean, let's be clear, Armenia doesn't have a clear strategy towards the Middle East. I always say that Armenia is part of the Middle East or the greater Middle East, and we should have a clear vision how to engage with the Arab countries. So yeah, maybe when it comes to the policy making towards the Middle East, I think there is somehow divergence between the Iranian and the Armenian interest in the region because Armenia cannot support publicly Iran and so on. However, it's also when it comes to South Caucasus, definitely the interests go hand in hand, especially against the so-called establishment of the Zangezur corridor, against when it comes to promoting or safeguarding Armenia's territorial integrity. This is something very important, and of course welcomed by Iran, and also in the future to contain the expansion of the Turkish influence in the region. This is something that I think it is strategic between Armenia and Iran, but I don't also expect that this relation or this strategic thinking, let's say, will go further or deepen because of many reasons. First of all, the American pressure to prevent Armenia to cooperate with Iran when it comes to security deals or arms purchase and so on. I mean, there's immense of pressure on Armenia about this issue, and I think Irans understand. However, when it comes to geoeconomic interest, it's very important that Iran is pushing the realization of the north-south route connecting the Georgian-Armenian border to the Armenian-Iranian border, that is the Black Sea to the Persian Gulf. This is very strategic. And I'm very happy that actually Iran, India, and Armenia are pushing for this direction because it is, I always say, this is a geoeconomic salvation for Armenia.
Yeghia, in the past 10 days, we've had international diplomats visit Armenia without visiting Baku, which sounded very strange to me. 3 diplomats, including Louis Bono, the US co-chair, Toivo Klar, the EU special rep, and Javier Colomina from NATO, all visited Armenia, but not Azerbaijan. We know that Azerbaijan's position is that we won't negotiate with Armenia in the West. And one option that I've heard, one explanation for this, is that Azerbaijan is basically giving a big démarche to the West about any negotiation or any signing of the so-called peace agreement in the Western capitals. But if that was the case, then we would hear a counter démarche, I believe, from Western states, which we're not hearing. So my fear, and fear of some analysts, is that basically the Western diplomats are in Armenia to force Aliyev's additional conditions against Armenia, including the corridor and so forth. Do you believe that's a justified fear?
So basically, if we will try to assess the Western engagement between Armenia and Azerbaijan, we have to understand or realize one thing, that through the Western platforms, Aliyev or Azerbaijan took everything and Armenia lost everything. Starting from of course, the issue of Artsakh, we lost everything, is for now. The issue of recognizing Azerbaijan's territorial integrity, where Azerbaijan or Aliyev even didn't recognize Armenian territorial integrity, and also recognizing Azerbaijan based on, I don't remember how many kilometers, while Aliyev still hasn't recognized Armenia based on the 29, I don't know how many kilometers that Pashinyan is trying to promote. So we didn't get anything. This is also another important step is that, I mean, of course, this is part, I mean, when I engage with Armenian scholars and Western officials, this was the idea that after the ethnic cleansing in Artsakh, the idea was that Aliyev was going to sign a peace treaty with Armenia, and then the border between Armenia and Turkey was going to be opened, and most probably later, the Pashinyan administration was going to say to the Russians that, now we have a peace agreement with Azerbaijan, the border with Turkey is open. So Pashinyan was going to show some flexibility against the Russians. However, Aliyev was much more smarter, actually. He literally was smart. He engaged in military operation, forced to split the Armenians of Artsakh. Now there is no Artsakh or Nagorno-Karabakh problem anymore. And now he was like, I don't need to sign a peace treaty. I took what I want. So basically, Armenia was sidelined. And this was also a betrayal for the Western interest in the region because the West and the Americans were betting that Aliyev was going to cooperate with them in order to kick the Russians from the region. I mean, Aliyev was much smarter than that. Of course, Turkey was not also now ready to see a Western influence in the region because for now, Erdogan is trying to cooperate with Putin almost on everything. So this is what happened. And now the West is trying to take a soft revenge and pressuring Azerbaijan to sign a peace treaty in any Western platform or even in Georgia, which would be acceptable to the West. However, I think that even Aliyev is not ready to sign any treaty in Moscow because he would give also leverage to the Russians. He's forcing a bilateral peace treaty so that there would be not a single guarantor, and later he can violate this peace treaty whenever he wants, as he violated the trilateral statement, and the Russians were not even a guarantor. I mean, even though the Russians should have been guarantor, but they were inactive for many, many reasons. So this is what Aliyev wants. He wants something to be signed and then show to the elections that, look, I have capitulated Armenia, our greatest enemy, And then he would have like literally provoke new wars or let's say new military operations to take or occupy hills and strategic positions from Armenia and realize the Zangezur corridor because this is the main objective. The main objective is actually to occupy Sunik, and it is published in their media. It is being talked. Sometimes they deny it or not, but this is their strategic aim and objective. We have to understand, even to give up everything and just have Yerevan and make Yerevan a Paris and then forget about anything, or we have to keep fighting.
Yeghia, in December, you wrote an interesting article about whether the EU has any strategy for Armenia. One of the tenets in the report you quoted struck me as a core bullet point around which a lot of the rest of the report was built. It said the EU should ensure that Armenia duly implements the commitments it has undertaken regarding the transport connection from Azerbaijan proper to Nakhichevan. The report also mentions that the EU has an interest in its realization. A second report you mentioned emphasized that Armenia should not have unrealistic expectations of the EU. So it sounds like the EU wants something out of Armenia, corridor specifically, the Zangezur corridor you just mentioned, and give pretty much nothing material in exchange. Maybe some goodwill political declarations, but what else could it do? It doesn't have the kind of military influence, the military reach into the South Caucasus that, for example, Russia and Turkey have. Now, these are not policy documents, but they do come from European think tanks that are listened to, and we'll put the links in our show notes. So they're not just a bunch of hot air. What conclusions do you draw from all the foreign policy ruminations in the EU about Armenia in the South Caucasus?
Definitely, and I remember these reports were published before the ethnic cleansing in Nagorno-Karabakh, and one of them was also funded by the Netherlands government or something like this, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So basically, the idea from the European or let's say the Western perspective is that, okay, guys, you signed something and you have to respect it. But this was like before the ethnic cleansing of Artsakh, and now I don't know what exactly the Europeans are thinking. So basically, they are like, we don't want the Russians to control this corridor because we don't want Russia to have a leverage on the East-West or China-Europe economic route, which already passes from Georgia, but would have an alternative route also from Armenia, which is strategic because it's shorter and so on. So the idea, some Western scholars, for example, I remember they suggested that maybe UN peacekeeping forces or expanding actually the EU military forces. And later it was discussed when European officials visited Armenia mid or end of November. The idea of Frontex also was suggested to guard the checkpoints between Armenia and Azerbaijan. However, the issue is that, again, we're stressing that the Europeans are not suggesting extraterritorial corridors. The problem is that they are not able to convince Azerbaijan to agree on just opening the transport because the Azerbaijan side is always pushing for extraterritorial corridor, even though they are saying that we don't want extraterritorial corridor, but let the Russians guard it. I'm like, okay, if the Russians will guard it, then how they will secure? I mean, if the Russians could secure the population of the Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh, how would they secure if any provocation in the future arises in Sunik?
That's right. Yeah. Can I mention that even today, as a matter of fact, for the second time, the EU told Azerbaijan that there would be grave consequences if it invades Armenia. I think this was Borrell. I'm not sure. But what are those grave consequences?
I mean, this is what exactly the Americans said before the ethnic cleansing of Artsakh, that it was a red line, and we saw the red lines. I mean, in the Middle East, we know the American and the Western red lines. It's just a pinky lines. There is no red line. There is only national interest. And as long as this interest is to contain the Russian, that small countries in the region will have to suffer.
Cannon fodder.
This is unfortunately. So mainly this is the interest or the policy in the region. Of course, from other perspective, they see Georgia and Armenia as a future models in the region to become more integrated in the Western infrastructure, while Azerbaijan, because of its autocratic system, it's impossible to integrate. This is also sometimes they are using a value-oriented policy. And also to pressure maybe Aliyev before the elections, even though it is clear that he will win the presidential elections. I mean, the others are just proxy candidates. So the question is that how Aliyev is also using this anti-Western rhetoric and narrative to mobilize the people to vote for him. He's literally becoming Erdogan before every Turkish parliamentary or presidential elections. If you realize, it's almost the same statement Erdogan uses against the West. He never criticizes Russia or China before elections. He always mobilized the Islamist population against the West. Now Aliyev is doing the same. He's saying that, we have to contain the Western or the US interest in the region. The Europe or the France is supporting Armenia because they are both Christians and blah blah. And Europe never, put its foreign policy on religious basis. So as Aliyev is doing its best to mobilize the people, and maybe this will be as a referendum showing forces that look, he is yes autocrat, but at the same time he enjoys the majority of this popularity. He enjoys popularity.
Yeah, sure. I agree that he enjoys post-war rabid nationalist euphoria, so he is popular. But to say that Aliyev is being elected or re-elected is, to me, nonsensical. He's a guy who beats the opposition, jails the opposition, and everything. So obviously, there is no competition for him right now.
I think that just my own pet peeve or comment. I think that when the EU and West say no, it acts like an aphrodisiac for Aliyev. And it actually turns into a big yes, because they've shown time and time again that they won't do anything. And this is appropriate because January 20th, 1920 was when the battles of Marash started, when hundreds of thousands of Armenians in Kilikia were deported and tens of thousands were murdered by Turks, while France simply stood by, or the best they could do is evacuate some of them. And just 2 days ago, Macron was gloating that, this year, 2023, they have decided to help defend Armenia or something ridiculous to that effect. So it is surreal what words can mean when they come from the mouth of the EU or the West.
Yeah. I want to note that you made a very interesting comment about the selective enforcement of the agreement, the trilateral agreement of November 2020. I don't know what's left of that agreement after September 19 of 2023. Artsakh was ethnically cleansed, the Lachin corridor essentially erased, Armenian sovereign territories invaded, Armenian POWs still in Baku. What part of that agreement do people want Armenia to honor still? I just don't get it.
Well, what is left on there is only the signatures.
Okay, so moving on, Yeghia, there was a Stratfor outlook for developments in the South Caucasus in 2024. Some Armenian media summarized it, and we're going to put those links in the show notes, so go look at those. But the key takeaways were essentially very high level. Progress in negotiations will continue, but there will be serious risks. Disagreements on the corridor issues are going to continue. Armenia's dependence on Russia will continue. Russian-Azerbaijani trade will grow, so that interdependence will grow as well. And if there is a war and Azerbaijan forcibly takes Syunik, Turkey and Azerbaijan will threaten to shift foreign policy towards Russia, China, and Iran in response to Western pressure to relinquish that territory. So I have a two-part question. What do you think of this high-level outlook for 2024, and what are your own expectations of 2024?
These are all my concerns, but not in the short term, but they are long concerns, of course. But who knows? Sometimes developments may happen quickly and in a second. And as we see, like no one was expecting a few years ago that the Armenians would lose Artsakh. But unfortunately, it happened. But I hope as a nation, we take some lessons. The problem is that Armenia's domestic politics is highly polarized. And now everyone is talking about constitutional changes when our priority should be something else. That's different subject. But of course, when it comes to Russia and Turkey, I think that their cooperation will be deepened. But however, it depends also with the outcome of the crisis of Ukraine. There is this small section, the railway section between Azerbaijan and Iran. If this railway section, which is the Astara and the Russian, which is almost 146 kilometers, which is also part of the international North-South corridor, if it is finalized, then of course Iran's and Russia's dependence on Azerbaijan will increase to become a bridge between South Caucasus or Russia and the Middle East. Then, for the first time, actually, the Russians will have a railway access to the Persian Gulf, and this is something very important for Russia and strategic. But also Azerbaijan's geoeconomic position will increase because it will become literally the bridge.
Yeah, it'll become the corridor.
Yeah, and it will become the bridge between, let's say, the north, which is Russia, and the south, which is the Middle East. Armenia's, of course, role is or position is being marginalized and isolated unless Armenia finalizes the construction of the north-south highway, which I mean, like I'm saying this maybe every time. It has been like, I don't know, 20 years I'm hearing about north-south highway, and this is a shame. As an Armenian, we have to feel the shame irrespective of our political belonging, ideology, and everything, that for the last 20 years, we couldn't finalize or construct this highway due to construction or maybe ignorance or whatever. And only this highway, which all connects the northern part of Armenia bordering Georgia to the southern part of Armenia, which is mainly bordering Iran, which is very strategic now, it will try to bring back Armenia to the geoeconomic map of the region, because this is our only importance. Armenia doesn't have any importance. I mean, like our churches, the monasteries, and the villages or the hills, no one cares about them. If you will be a proactive country as a small state, you have to show some flexibility and new initiatives to attract investments and cooperation with the other countries. We have to take advantage of India's interest in Armenia, Iran's interest in Armenia. I can say that the good and the positive relations between Georgia, but also we'll have to find a way and a common tongue with the Russians that, look, this is our only salvation. If you want Armenia to survive on the political map, then we have to help us so that we can construct this highway. It's very interesting. The problem is that the visibility of this project is that, according to some researchers, that it will finalize by 2030 or 2032. And this is very long. I'm not sure if Armenia has the long breath to hold until 2032, because we don't know what will happen next month.
Mm-hmm.
We have to do our best to finalize this project and at least to bring investments in Syunik and engage in other activities to also not to secure, but also to so that the population in Syunik will feel more secure and they will not feel abandoned by the authorities or by their neighbors, friendly neighbors.
All right, I'll wrap up there for the topics. So I'd like to ask each of you if there's been something on your mind this past week that you want to talk about. Yeghia, anything on your mind that you'd like to share?
I was going to talk something, but since a few or an hour ago we were talking about this, the naming of the new textbook, the history text. It's really shameful. Sometimes I really being shamed that sometimes am I Armenian or what? I mean, this is the question. I'm starting to raise existential questions because I was a history teacher in the mid-year school previous year. So okay, it's Armenian history we say because Armenia didn't exist as a political entity, and it was occupied at least in the last 6 centuries. We didn't have a monarch. The last monarch was the Kilikian monarch, which was abolished almost 8 centuries ago.
Right.
So if we will talk about the history of Armenia, then we don't have the right to talk about the history of Cilicia because that's outside current Armenian borders of Armenia. We don't have the right talk about the Armenian merchants in Chuga and so on. We don't have the right to talk about diaspora. Even we don't have the right to talk about the Ottoman Empire and the genocides. We just have to talk about...
Yeah, I believe, let me just give a context for our listeners. The context is that Pashinyan, in one of the continuing verbal diarrheas that he's having recently, he said something to the effect of that Armenian history in schools should be changed and it should be the history of the Republic of Armenia, which is in line with his defeatist and questionable in terms of patriotism strategy of limiting Armenia essentially, both in terms of the 29,800 square kilometers, I guess physically, and in our collective conscience. So I just wanted to give that context. So please go ahead.
Yeah. So we'll not also talk about the history of Urartu because Urartu started in Van and not in Yerevan. So, I mean, it's like silly things we're discussing. I mean, the whole country, the intellectuals, the so-called intellectuals in Armenia are literally discussing and debating silly things. I mean, I'm opening my Facebook and like this nation is dying, literally. I'm like, where are the intellectuals? Like literally constructive criticism. I'm not saying mocking Pashinyan or something, but at least constructive criticism that, guys, you're doing wrong. For example, in the Lebanese history, we say like history of Lebanon. I mean, like it's the whole Phoenician. We start from Phoenicia, it's a cross border because we are a global nation. This is something that we have to understand. We have always been a remote nation. Well, this is something we have to understand. Hopefully, I mean, like the Ministry of Education, Culture, Sport, whatever is it, takes these concerns into consideration.
Yeah, and when I saw that, I was quite concerned that even the diaspora would be left out because it's not part of the Republic of Armenia.
So I think the Ministry of Education is busy right now. They're trying to fix the shower heads in the school.
Hovik, anything on your mind that you would like to share?
Yeah, I think that we have said everything that needs to be said. Yeah, I think when you mentioned that, there are no intellectuals, it's very easy, I think, for us to criticize, where is everyone? But you are right that Armenia is very polarized, and I think the opposition is rightly, I haven't heard anything from the opposition in terms of supporting this, and I think it's a shitty idea, but there's just like all around demoralization. And I think in this environment, Pashinyan is basically full steam ahead in terms of all the things that he wants to do. And you mentioned the constitutional changes. Unfortunately, I think all the things that are making us strong, that, Yerevan, as they say, the Spur, Kayastan, and Artsakh, the Armenian Church, all of those things can be addressed in one fell swoop with the so-called constitutional changes. And while I don't believe that this is in Pashinyan's interest, I think that certain, forces may be pushing him towards doing that. So if these constitutional changes are materialized, or if we see that Pashinyan is going forward, then he has, I think, received strong guarantees from the West that he will continue to suppress the opposition and oppress and go full dictator mode. And that's what I'm worried about, that Pashinyan is clinging to power, and the only way he will do these things is if he has guarantees. And we know that, both Azerbaijan and Turkey have explicitly said that, you must change the constitution, you must remove references to Armenian genocide, you must remove references to the 1998 vote to join Armenia with Artsakh. So I think, but I think Pashinyan is doing nothing other than fulfilling the demands that come from our enemies at this point.
Okay, we're going to leave it there for today. Thank you, Yeghia, for joining us.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Yeghia.
That was our show, recorded on January 22, 2024. We've been talking with Yeghia Tashjian, who is a regional analyst and researcher based in Beirut with expertise in China's geopolitical and energy security interests in Iran and the Persian Gulf. Currently, he is an instructor in international affairs at the American University of Science and Technology and senior research assistant at the Essam Fares Institute for Public Policy and International Affairs at the American University of Beirut. I'm Asbed Bedrossian.
And this is Hovik Manucharyan.
Please find us on social media and follow us everywhere you get your Armenian news. The links are in the show notes. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next week.